After surviving the console wars of the 1990s,
The Bit War veterans are invading your podcast
to bring you gaming intel,
and old tales.
we are your hosts, Max Inventory,
And Meow Te Ching.
and we are
The Bit War Veterans.
Welcome to Episode 2. On today's episode, we'll be quickly covering the news. Then we're going to talk about some secondhand PS2 finds that Meow Te Ching came across. On today's Game & Watch radar, we're going to be talking about Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove, the new sequel that we have all been waiting for ever since the third one for Xbox.
The third one, yeah, most people aren't even aware that there was a third one made. We're gonna get funky with Toe Jam and Earl. And we'll be covering Ukulele. Ooh.
The spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie.
The game that features all the 3D platforming collectathon goodness that you've missed.
But our main discussion for the show will be
Virtual reality. Where it came from and where it's going.
from the Bit War veteran perspective. How has this tech grown from the 80s to now? And in today's Tell the Tale portion, we are covering your Twitter responses to the anti-nostalgia subject.
Yeah, things from our childhoods that we remember that we would kind of like to forget. All of this and more jam-packed into Bit War Veterans Episode 2. Attack of the VR Clones.
River City Ransom, the NES classic, is back in the news.
Right, River City Ransom, the granddaddy of beat-em-ups. You know, River City Ransom, the game for the NES, where you got to beat people up. And you get to beat people up with your buddies. Just a few days ago, we have some really exciting news that broke. Someone has discovered a secret code.
Previously undiscovered.
This code is actually pretty helpful. No one's known it for 20, 30 years.
It's incredible. It's incredible we're still finding these things.
I think it's amazing. YouTuber Bizquit has a detailed video about how he's obtained this code. The title of Bizquit's YouTube video is Cracking Video Game Passwords, River City Ransom, Season 1, Episode 9.
So you can search for yourself. What do you have to do to make this code happen?
Well, you just have to put in the password, but...
Oh.
As you all know, River City Ransom passwords are ridiculously long, so we're not going to say it here. If you really want to know, you could look it up, right?
He does it best himself anyways.
What it gives you in the game, it's pretty cool. It's almost like having a little game genie cheat, because it's that useful.
What does this code offer?
So the cheat code is pretty helpful because it gives you a faster combo speed when you're punching the dudes. It gives you maxed out money and access to all of the technique books. So this is not just a little whatever code or a little Easter egg that's been discovered. It's actually something pretty helpful.
So you could just begin with all the moves ready to rock and roll, all
yeah.
the monies.
All the monies. I'm really surprised that a cheat code this useful has gone unknown for such a long time. And it's taken someone to like literally dig and rip apart this game to find it.
It's a testament to how the interest is kept up in these games. The love doesn't die over time. We still love these games. We are still playing them. We're still trying to hack them.
Right, and it kind of reminds me of another news story that came out earlier this year.
Another game that recently had a code cracked.
Involving one of our fighting favorites,
Mortal Kombat! This involves the very first 3 Mortal Kombat arcade machines. So if you're lucky enough to have one, you can try it out, or go to your local arcade and impress your friends. The code is a series of left and right blocks
between player 1 and player 2 on the arcades.
YouTuber Your MK Arcade Source, all one word, has posted the video explaining this code, how to enter it, and what it does.
The title of his video is Mortal Kombat Arcade, Secret Hidden Ed Boon Menu Finally Discovered.
Now, I believe this works on the first 3 games, and the sequence is nearly the same for all of them.
Yeah, it's a bunch of blocks back and forth. You could look up the code if you're really interested. But what it does is it unlocks a special debug menu, which has been conveniently nicknamed the EJB menu. Edward J. Boone.
Oh, EJB.
Yeah, so it's the menu that's named after him because he stuck it in the game, and no one's discovered it until now.
He shows you these debug menus. You get to choose a couple options from.
The menus have a couple of little options and things you could do in the game. One of them being you could view everybody's ending. So you select a character and you could see how that character's ending screen happens. Another thing the menus have is a coin count. So you could see how many people have put in coins in the machine. You could also edit the high score and put your name in the menu, even if you never really actually got the high score.
Fake it till you make it.
And there is a little thank you section on these menus.
If you're into programmer love.
So the arcade machine Mortal Kombat 3 has a little bit more interesting things to offer when you put in this code.
It's what I like to see, the fatalities.
That's right. You could watch all the characters' fatalities in this one, which is great because you could go to the arcade and show off all the fatalities to your friends because you don't remember how to do them.
Finish him! So that's really cool. If you're at an arcade, you pop that on, just show off the fatalities.
You also have this little bit of a mini game. It's a very cruel mini game, but you could play a Space Invaders type mini game, but it's probably going to kill you in like 5 seconds.
Just like on PlayStation when the loading screen came up, you got to play it. It's the same game, it looks like. You start off in the middle of fire from everything, so it's pretty much impossible. But it's fun.
Another interesting thing in the Mortal Kombat 3 menu, as explained by Psycho96 on YouTube.
If you want to see that video yourself, the title is UMK3 Free Play Exploit.
There's a unlockable free play mode. So this is possibly why we've never seen these codes until now. Because you could go to the arcade, pop in this free play code, and you don't have to put quarters in the machine.
I wonder if there are a couple savvy goofballs out there, Mortal Kombat nerds, who did know this code but kept it secret, kept it to themselves, just so they could play for free.
Ooh, what a sneaky thing to do. But now it's all in the open, so I guess arcade owners, you better keep an eyeball on your Mortal Kombat 3 machine.
They're coming for you. It's out in the open. Free information.
WikiLeaks. Mortal Kombat leaks.
What else is there to say about Mortal Kombat?
That's it.
We love Mortal Kombat. We know you love Mortal Kombat. Check out the videos from those awesome YouTubers. Comment on them and tell them that we sent you. We have to touch on this real quickly because last episode, our first episode, we had a pretty good portion dedicated to speculation upon the new Nintendo console. Well, they answered our call 2 weeks later and dropped a video for their new console, the NS, Nintendo Switch. Now, unfortunately, we cannot cover this in this episode due to time constraints, and, well, frankly, we had it all planned right before they dropped that.
Thanks, Nintendo.
But we are coming out with a YouTube video.
If you want to hear our first reactions and opinions on the Nintendo Switch, we're going to be doing a YouTube video about that. So go ahead and go on the Bit War Veterans YouTube page, like and subscribe, and check out our very first video on Nintendo Switch reactions and opinions.
So keep listening to the podcast, and when you're finished, drop over to the YouTube, youtube.com, search Bit War Veterans. Meow, you found a couple of nothing special but cute PlayStation 2 games today.
I sure did.
You were out in Amish country.
I was out in Amish country today.
The good old Midwest.
Ah, yes.
The salt of the earth.
If you travel far enough into Indiana, you hit Amish country.
You have to pass through us to get somewhere better.
So, what did I even get today?
Some kind of classics.
Okay. So I picked up some classics for the PlayStation 2 today at an Amish market of all places. I honestly don't know if the actual vendor I was buying from was Amish or not, but it was just at an Amish market.
He
so-
was a Mennonite,
Yes, he was Mennonite or Hutterite, possibly.
possibly on a rugby team.
So the games I got were Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Ooh.
One of the best, probably the best of the series. Let's face it, guys.
Yes.
I already have it, though.
I also got Bully.
Bully.
Ooh, that famous Rockstar game.
I don't remember that game actually being that fun to play, but I do remember the stupid controversy around it, as if Rockstar Games gives a damn what anyone thinks about what the kind of games they make.
They don't.
No.
I also picked up Hitman
Hitman.
and another game with the word man in it.
Pac-Man.
No, Manhunt.
Manhunt.
Oh, you remember that game.
The other Rockstar controversial. Okay, all their games are controversial.
Yeah, I think that's what they do. They do controversial games and then a ping pong game.
You got a ping pong game.
No, that's what Rockstar. They do controversial games and ping pong games.
I think Manhunt was the first game they did after like Grand Theft Auto 3 and the success of that. And it seemed to me they just wanted to make the game that was going to outdo all of the negative press they got for Grand Theft Auto 3. So they made this game Manhunt, where you're pretty much killers, like psycho sadist killers, and your job is to go around and like murder people in wild ways and videotape it. Isn't it something like that?
Yeah.
Or you have to kill the murderers? I haven't played that, oh my god, since it came out.
I you know what? I honestly forget the intricacies of the plot of Manhunt because I was too busy strangling people with piano wire.
Yeah, chainsaws. I remember that. Lots of chainsaws.
I remember severing heads and then throwing them out to distract and scare people.
Yeah. Blowing things up.
What a lovely game.
It's for the family.
And that's why I bought it. And the last game of the bunch was Resident Evil 4.
The PS2 release.
The PS2 release, correct.
I actually tried to play this on the Wii. I couldn't do it. You know, Nintendo, I love you, but I hated the Wii.
Yeah, well, maybe you could sit down with the PlayStation 2 version and just,
Have my fun with it.
have your fun with it.
I hope so, because I stopped playing Resident Evil at 4.
Yeah, that's really sad because 4 is regarded as one of the best ones by many people. If you were an old Resident Evil fan who loved Resident Evil 4, let us know on our Twitter. You could either tweet me directly at Miaotei-Ching, or you could tweet us at
Bitwar Vets. Tell us why you did or did not like Resident Evil 4. So there's one last game in the batch. Pulled this one out of a Goodwill, I think.
Oh yeah, this is something I got not in Amish country, but I found it at a thrift store a few days ago. Get this. I kind of squeed when I saw it because it was just such an odd thing to come across. I found a sealed. Yes,
Sealed! That's for you, Pat. Sealed!
Yes, plastic still on it. Copy of Doom for the Macintosh.
The Macintosh.
And not only was it Doom, but it was Doom with an expansion. Sealed for the Mac.
Doom Plus.
Yes, for the Mac of all platforms. But I thought that was very cool. I just saw it in the thrift store and I had to buy it.
Miaotei-Ching, do you hear that?
Mayday! Mayday!
I've got bogeys on the Game & Watch radar.
Oh my gosh, and these bogeys look really funky.
That's right, we're being invaded from space again.
From planet Funkotron.
Our favorite boys from the Sega Genesis classic Toe Jam and Earl are coming back to us from the original creator.
Greg Johnson, yes.
He never got to make the true sequel that he wanted to, the original Toe Jam and Earl. So now he's come back through the form of Kickstarter to bring us the sequel we've really wanted ever since the very first game.
Toe Jam and Earl back in the groove.
A very appropriate title.
Yes.
This game is set to release next year, hopefully first quarter. It's been in development since its Kickstarter inception last year, 2015.
Yeah, it grossed over $500,000 with close to 9,000 different backers.
That's
Wow.
$500,000.
$500,000 production. People are really excited to see Greg Johnson publishing and creating his own game.
I know when we initially saw it, I wanted to give money to it, and by the time I finally had the additional funds, when I went back to it, the Kickstarter was closed because they reached their goal so fast.
Yeah, it was originally going to be on Steam, but there was so much excitement and so many backers that they were able to make a Steam version and an Xbox One and PlayStation 4 version. So we're going to get the triple whammy with this one.
And that's thanks to being picked up by Adult Swim Publishing.
Adult Swim Games has published previous titles such as Robot Unicorn Attack, 5 Minutes to Kill Yourself, and Jazz Punk. And they're currently making a Rick and Morty VR game. Whoa.
I bet that's hilarious.
And Greg Johnson's studio, Human Nature Studios, is developing it.
One of the main reasons we bring up the Kickstarter for this game, or the fact that it was a Kickstarter, is because many Kickstarters fail, especially in the video game side of the market.
Whether they don't raise enough funds or they raise enough funds and people feel like the game doesn't deliver.
Not only was this a Kickstarter success, but its rewards actually followed through. I'll tell you right now, the best video you could find of the Kickstarter reward unboxing is by Retro Game Players on YouTube. The name of that video is Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove, Kickstarter Reward, Action Figures, and More. Pickup number 18. That's by Retro Game Players.
And these toys look juicy. He unboxes a various amount of goodies, a couple of them being vinyl Toe Jam and Earl figures. And that really makes me wonder, since it's being published by Adult Swim Games, and we all know that Adult Swim really likes to make a lot of merchandise, that maybe we could see some Toe Jam and Earl merchandise coming into stores if this game is a success. The vinyl figures looked really cool, and there were t-shirts and mugs.
Keychains, coffee mugs, hoodies. There was a hoodie. He got posters.
But what we're really excited about is the game itself. I mean, wow. It looks like a really great successor to the original Sega Genesis game. As we all know, Greg Johnson tried to make the game he wanted, but he kind of claims he was bullied around by publishers and
the higher-ups.
the producers having other ideas about how his game should be. So this time, since it's Kickstarter funded, and it's all him, baby, he's making the game he always wanted to make, and it looks like it's going to be great.
Groovy.
Funky.
You can find videos of the gameplay from the recent PAX and a couple of commercials. Adult Swim has produced a commercial they're airing already. This is a fantastic looking game. If you are a fan of the classic, there are so many original gameplay elements coming back to this game, as well as new elements to make this feel like a fresh and funky game. One of the things that strikes me immediately is that it has the original Sega Genesis gameplay perspective, that kind of top-down, you're moving with your partner, and if you get too far apart from each other, it splits screens. And like we advocate on this show, video games need more couch co-op.
There's something magical about sitting down with your friends and physically playing video games next to each other. I think it creates a lot of really good memories, like the time we beat Toe Jam and Earl just last summer after trying so hard. We would load it up weekend after weekend and try, because this game could actually be pretty grueling in difficulty. Now, I really hope the new game is just as challenging as the old one, but some other cool things it looks like it features is the random world generation that was in the original game. And when you're walking on the world in this new game, it looks like you could see part of the map of the world below you, which you were not able to do in the original Toe Jam and Earl.
In the original Toe Jam and Earl, it has somewhat of an E.T. story where you're trying to phone home. They crash land on planet Earth, and their ship busts into different pieces. So you have to go world by world to discover the pieces, put them all together so you can fly back home. That's why there are these different tiers, these different realms. Of course, it's hard to describe visual elements to audio, But for those of you who are fans of the classic Genesis, this is really neat and striking immediately that the plane you are on, you can see the world below you. And I think that is really awesome.
Some of the changes that I noticed in Back in the Groove is the type of worlds you get to explore. In the original Toe Jam and Earl, you walked around different kind of like grassland settings and this weird world that had like cheesy pudding.
I think it was supposed to be sand, but we always called it nacho cheese.
Yeah, it looks like cheese. And then there were some water worlds as well. In this one, it looks like you could also walk around in winter wonderland type worlds and desert planets.
There is much more variety in the terrain itself. Before
Yeah.
it was just you, the player, and pretty much the NPCs and the bad guys. Now we see more physical structures like houses, lampposts, taller bushes, and you can interact with those things. You could shake the environment pieces and get presents out of them. You can also hide. There's a hide feature where you can kind of dodge enemies by hiding in tall grass or behind certain structures.
Speaking of the enemies, we see some old enemies returning and some new faces.
There's definitely your old favorites like the whacked out dentist, the boogeyman.
We have the angry dad pushing a lawnmower. And then we have confusing Cupid making a return.
This game also features a lot of new characters, some friendly and unfriendly, of course.
One of the friendly characters that's new to this game is the sushi truck. It looks like a food truck, and you could walk up to it and buy sushi with the money that you find.
In this game, you collect money, you have a health bar, you have to find, or in this case, buy food to replenish your health. Previously, they did not have that. In the first game at least, you had to find food on your own.
It looks like money is going to be a little bit more important in this game. Another friendly unit is the Dungeons and Dragons nerds. They're dressed up in different kind of cosplay, and they're playing a D&D game, so you could walk up to them and wager money and play a little dice rolling mini game. And if you beat them, you get to make some money. But if you lose, then you lose your money.
There's also a pharaoh-looking character. When you pay him money, he walks around and casts this spell. He kind of follows you for a little bit, and he casts some magic or whatever that shakes all the local environments to get the presents out for you. He kind of reveals the secrets or whatever. When it comes to bad guys, there are some really silly characters, like a cop on a Segway that looks like Paul Blart Mall Cop or something.
Another new bad guy we have is the FBI agent, and it looks like if he kind of tasers you, he turns all the presents that you pick up. These are the items you get in the game. And it looks like he turns all the items that you get into random items, mystery items, so you don't know what they are.
There's a ghost cow in the game, and this looks hilarious. Once it tries to possess your body, it almost looks like a fart cloud or something, and it goes into your body. And I can't tell if it takes control of your character and moves it around randomly, or if it's similar to the Cupid where it messes with your controls so you don't know what you're doing. There's also a caveman running around with a club trying to smash you. There's a giant snow yeti for the snow levels. It runs around trying to smash.
And then we also have this kind of lab engineering kind of crazy genius character, and you bring him items that you get from present boxes, and he could fix them. Now, this is an entirely new concept in the game. If you're familiar with the old Toe Jam and Earl, then you'll remember all those different gift boxes you could pick up, and you don't know what they do until you open them. So you learn what these items are over the course of exploring in the game. Now, once you used up the items, they were gone forever until you opened up a new gift box.
Well, what the mechanic is that some items can be broken, and if you use them in their broken state, they might have a different effect or a negative effect, and the doc can fix them for you. I call him the Doc because he's reminiscent of Christopher Lloyd's character in Back to the Future. Speaking of new characters, there are also new playable characters. Right off the bat, there are 9 selections, with some of them locked. Right away, there are Toe Jam and Earl, but there's also classic Toe Jam and Earl from the Genesis days that look different. And not only that, but the game also acknowledges this. If you were, for example, to run with old school Earl and modern Toe Jam, in the game there would be voice lines like Earl asking Toe Jam, "Hey buddy, are we still friends in the future?" And some of the NPCs also acknowledge this by saying, "Hey, what's up, old school Earl?" or things like that. In addition to that, there's Flo and Lawanda. I think these were characters from Toe Jam and Earl 3 for the Xbox.
People are aware of the first two Toe Jam and Earl games for the Genesis. There was an Xbox version released to little fanfare because it really wasn't that great. It tried to introduce more 3D elements to the exploration of Toe Jam and Earl, but I don't think it delivered. And neither did a lot of other people because most people don't even know about it.
And when it comes to identifying your presence, the wise man is back. That's right, the old man in the carrot suit is back to identify your presence for money. And in addition to this, characters now have stats, and they can level these stats, and they have to see the wise man in order to complete the leveling process.
It seems like they want to add in RPG elements to this game because of the stat system, which is unique to this game. The older games didn't have anything like it.
Maybe they did on Xbox, but again, no one really played that. Either way, we don't have too many specifics on the stats themselves, but we know they're there.
I think it'll definitely help differentiate all the different character choices from one another.
Give us a reason to want to pick Earl over Flo or LaWanda or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And there could even be strategy in that. One person moves slowly but is able to take more damage, while the other can cover ground more quickly. For fans of Toe Jam and Earl 2 on the Sega Genesis, they have brought back the Hyperfunk Zone. And it functions in almost the same way. There's the parking meter, you deposit some money in, and there's this weird, like, trans-dimensional coffin thing that you transport into. And you go to the Hyperfunk Zone. It has a different art style, just like the second game, and plays as a 2D speed side-scroller where you're basically just running on a track and trying to jump and avoid obstacles and pick up goodies.
Toe Jam and Earl is known for their funky soundtracks and their booming bass lines, the kind of music you want to skateboard to with your boombox.
I love it.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. And
We're both amateur bass players. We're amateurs, but we love bass guitar, we love rhythm, and we love funk.
Cody Wright and Nick Stubelfield. I really hope I'm saying your name right. I'm sorry, Mr. Nick. These are our two composers for Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove. And the music that I've heard is just phenomenal. It stays true to its funky roots. It definitely calls upon tunes and melodies that have been used in the original Toe Jam and Earl, and it breathes new life into it. Because it's all live instrumentation this time instead of, 16-bit generated sounds. And I really, really urge you to check out Cody Wright and his YouTube channel because it's just filled with amazing bass work.
He is a fantastic musician. That's Cody Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T.
He's doing all the bass work for Toe Jam and Earl Back in the Groove, and there's just videos upon videos of him playing live, messing around in the studio. There's a lot of Toe Jam and Earl jam-alongs, and he's just amazing, an extremely talented bass player, and definitely, he looks like a really cool guy to hang out with.
This also seems to be a wonderful year for video game anniversaries, and right on time. Toe Jam and Earl is
turning 25.
It is the 25th anniversary. That means I was around 7 or 8 years old when the first game came out.
I never owned a Sega Genesis growing up, and I had very little exposure to Toe Jam and Earl as a kid, but I rediscovered it through the magic of ROMs and emulators, and it became one of my favorite games of all time. It has so much replay value. I really hope that Back in the Groove has the same kind of random world generation that the original has, because that provided me with hours and hours and hours of fun, and it gives me a reason to pick up the game and play it to this very day.
Toe Jam and Earl 2 Back in the Groove is set to release next year, 2017, first quarter at some time on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. And you can bet you will see me and Miao-Te Ching playing that game forever. What is the next game on our Game & Watch radar?
It's Yooka-Laylee.
Yooka-Laylee.
This is another Kickstarter-funded game.
Set to release early next year.
So what is ukulele? If you haven't heard, ukulele is set to be kind of the spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie and other 3D exploration collectathon games of its time.
This was another Kickstarter success. Of course, we have faith that the finished game will be exactly what they promised due to tons of gameplay footage available online. But this also broke records in being that it raised $2 million. And the first $1 million was earned in the first 24 hours of it being opened up to the public.
Wow, yes, just think, in one day, people donated $1 million for this project. I don't even think the creators, in their wildest dreams, would have expected such a positive response.
They didn't expect it, and they had to invent new Kickstarter goals in order to accommodate the amount of money that they had coming in.
It's being developed by Playtonic Games, and Playtonic Games has a lot of ex-Rare developers up their sleeves. Yes, a lot of people, a lot of coders, a lot of artists, a lot of music composers. This team is jam-packed with talent. It was published by Team 17, and they're the people who publish most of the Worms games. And they've been in this business a very long time.
We have people who have worked on games like Killer Instinct, the old Donkey Kong Countries, Banjo-Kazooie, of course.
We have Grant Kirkhope working on this game, composing tracks. If you don't know who Grant Kirkhope is, you've probably heard his music before. He's composed for GoldenEye on the N64, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, Viva Pinata, and he's also the voice of Donkey Kong. Yeah, all those modern Donkey Kong grunts that you hear comes out of his mouth.
And it's very fitting for this game, seeing as that how its gameplay style seems to resemble classic N64 titles like Donkey Kong, Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Yeah, Super Mario 64, and even kind of reminds me of like the old level design of Jumping Flash. We also have David Wise composing some of the soundtracks and lending his talent. Now, David Wise is definitely a veteran upon veterans of video game composition. You might have heard some of his music on the NES, such as Marble Madness. He's done music for Battletoads and Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo. The Donkey Kong music is some of my favorites, so this has given me a lot of hope with the soundtrack and sound design in Ukulele. And last but not least, we have Steve Burke, who's worked on Star Fox Adventures, Cameo, Elements of Power, and he's developed sound effects and music for Xbox Live avatars. So this is just a trifecta of amazing and talented composers and sound designers that are working on this game, and it gives me so much hope to play ukulele and feel immersed in this really colorful and playful environment that recalls a lot of old design and video game that's kind of not been touched on since the early 3D era.
In Ukulele, you play as Yuka the Chameleon and Laylee his friend Bat. Together, you have to stop Dr. Quack from absorbing all the literature in the world and somehow turning it into profit. Together, you have to collect pages to use tomes in order to stop the bad guys. If you look up the gameplay footage or the trailers, looks like all the classic platformer fun. I almost don't know what to say other than this game looks fun.
Right, because not only is it about exploring the environment, but you see the characters have different ways of traversing around the environment.
Their dynamic duo reminds me of Sonic and Tails in that you mainly play the one who is running and jumping, while the other partner is able to help you fly and access other points of the environment you normally couldn't with the main character.
So kind of like Banjo-Kazooie, where you work as a duo doing different combinations of moves, Ukulele has some of this in their trailers that we've seen so far, and in the Toy Box demo that some of the Kickstarter backers received.
There are new moves like sonar blasting, there's tongue whipping, you can do a fire breath, and then when you're underwater you do this cool move that's a fart bubble, where basically you fart and then you are encapsulated in this air bubble so you can move through the water instead of floating through it.
After the N64 era, we didn't really see games that had this type of level exploration. So Ukulele is the first game in a long time that's touching on this type of level design. I think it offers something for kids and the casual player, and also the hardcore collector who wants to get 100% of everything in the game.
What was the last 3D platformer you really played? Aside from maybe Mario Galaxy, the last thing I can think of was Spyro the Dragon 2 or something for PlayStation 2.
Spyro the Dragon?
Is it Spyro or Spyro?
Everyone I know calls it Spyro.
Maybe we'll have to let the listeners decide.
It's definitely Spyro. You're the odd one out.
Well, what was the last platformer you remember playing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be maybe Mario Galaxy on the Wii. Or Super Mario 3D Land on Wii U?
Yeah, that's kind of.
But there's a certain type of
Right.
level design that those games have kind of gone past. So think back to Donkey Kong 64, Conker's Fur Day.
Blasto. Do you all remember that? Voiced by Phil Hartman. That was such a cool game for PS1.
Oh yeah, Blasto, I remember that.
Earthworm Jim even tried to make a debut into 3D platforming, but then wasn't that hot.
So Yooka-Laylee is a game that touches upon a certain type of level design of the past that's fallen out of style. But I think that's why there's so much excitement behind it, because this is a kind of level design that we really haven't seen executed correctly in a very long time. And if we look at the people who are working on this game, it looks like it's an A+ staff of developers. Yooka-Laylee is probably going to pull at our heartstrings. And if you're an older gamer, you might be interested in the N64 mode that's included in Yooka-Laylee. Yes, you could make Yooka-Laylee look like an N64 game. It's definitely really detailed and highly polished, but you could turn down the polish and turn down the polygons and turn on N64 mode when you get it. And I think that's absolutely hilarious.
It looks marvelous. There's a certain charm to it, I won't lie.
Right, so if you really want to feel like you're playing an old Banjo-Kazooie type game, turn on N64 mode.
As a nod to modern 2D side-scrollers, Yooka-Laylee will also be featuring a cameo by the Shovel Knight.
Yooka-Laylee is slated for a Q1 2017 release. It's going to be on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Steam, and Wii U. Whatever that thing is, collecting dust.
It's time for today's main topic, Attack of the VR Clones. The year is 2016.
The 80s and 90s cyberpunk future we dreamed of finally becomes a reality.
A virtual reality.
A virtual insanity. In 2016, we've seen 3 commercial releases of virtual reality technology. We really haven't seen that much virtual reality technology being showcased since the early to mid 90s.
And most of that technology was not available for the consumer. But we're going to get into that in our timeline discussion. We're also going to talk about those current 3 major headsets that are available. We're going to compare them. We're going to talk about which ones we think is most viable.
And I'm also going to share with you some of my experiences with VR over the years. Starting with the 1960s, where the idea of virtual reality first starts kicking off.
However, it was not viable to have it available for the consumer. It wasn't that good. As you can imagine, it was the 1960s. So throughout that time and through the 80s, it was developed further by the military and NASA.
There was nothing available for the consumers until the later 80s.
One of the inventions that came out of that was the Nintendo Power Glove, believe it or not. It started off as an accompaniment to the old VR headsets called the Data Glove, where you were able to manipulate objects into 3D virtual space.
So this technology was being developed by NASA, and Nintendo was the first company to use this practical application and turn it into commercial hardware.
As the technology improved and was more consumer available, this started to be featured in theme parks, shopping malls, arcades, various entertainment centers, where they would have like group VR games.
Some of these virtual reality experiences were passive, where you would sit down in a chamber with maybe 10 other people in the seats with you, and you would be shown a video of like going on a roller coaster or going on some sort of minecart adventure. So we started seeing these things as entertainment models.
Miao Te-Ching, don't you have an experience with this early 90s VR that you played at some theme park or something?
I have a couple of them, and I think it kind of helps to illustrate the timeline as well. Let's see, the first experience I remember, I was very little, and it was extremely simple. You put on a VR helmet, and it just kind of showed you a movie. There wasn't anything really special about it. It was pretty much just watching a movie 3 inches away from your face. But it was all computer generated, and this is in a time where computer generated graphics were extremely simple, and by today's standards, looks awful.
You'd also mentioned that there were some setups where you could put on the headset, but you were also on this platform where you were able to walk in place.
I played it at Six Flags Great America in probably the mid-90s, I'm guessing. And yeah, you would get into this little open pod thing. Imagine you're standing on a small platform, and this platform would kind of scroll underneath you, kind of like a treadmill in a way. And you would have this VR helmet on, and you were typically carrying some sort of virtual reality gun. And this was more of an immersive experience because, first off, I was playing a game. It was a shooting game, first-person shooter. So there already was a different level of interaction available to me from the very start. I could walk and turn in a 360-degree environment, and whenever I would walk, the platform I was standing on would kind of scroll so I could walk in place. And it really felt like going through this environment. And I would aim my gun around, and I would be able to shoot these various creatures and entities in my virtual reality world. Once again, keep in mind, this is the mid-90s. Things were very simple polygons. Textures were not detailed. The graphics were very simple. But just in terms of immersion and what they were able to do, from my first VR experience, I was able to see a lot of progression of the technology. There was this place called Disney Quest that existed for a while. It was kind of like an extremely large, glorified arcade with some old machines, but a lot of really new things. Whereas about me and maybe 6 to 8 other people, we put on virtual reality helmets, and we had to sit down in individual seats. And we got these, they looked like hilts of swords, which you had to hold in your hand. And the whole game was we were on like a spaceship, like an open air barge. Think Return of the Jedi. And so we're on this kind of open air barge, and we were all on the same team fighting against the computer, which was like dragons and stuff that would fly in and swoop down, and some people would like try to board the ship, and you'd have to fight them off with your sword. And it sounds really cool. It was. For some reason, the helmet that I was given just didn't fit me right, and it kept wanting to come off my head. And I had to like readjust the helmet constantly. I really couldn't get into the game and swing the sword properly like how you were supposed to. And I just remember our team ended up losing.
Now that's an immersion breaker. If your headset, or as you're saying, helmet, because this was the early 90s.
Yeah, these things were huge.
That's an immersion breaker if your headset is not properly adjusted for your vision.
I could definitely see the progression over time.
Once we got to the mid-90s, we even saw companies like Sega wanting to get into the virtual reality market. It was showcased at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1993, and just recently that video has resurfaced on the internet on YouTube. They had something like 5 fully developed games for it, but as you can imagine, why would you want 16-bit Sega graphics up in front of your eyeballs? It was kind of ugly.
It really wasn't that immersive.
So they ended up scrapping it, and probably for the best, because as we know, Sega had already made a bunch of bad decisions with peripherals in the 90s, like the Activator. Do you remember that?
Oh boy, if you want to see how silly the Sega Activator looks in person, you gotta look up this YouTube video. It features Siskel and Ebert, of all people, the movie review guys.
From the 90s.
Oh yes, so the video is called Siskel and Ebert Holiday Gift Guide 1993 Sega. And in it, they show how an activator works, and it's really funny. You gotta look it up because this product looks really awful, and Siskel and Ebert, which are two people that aren't gamers at all, they have no idea what they're doing, and they just look so silly doing this. They're just like flailing their arms, and it's so awkward. You gotta check it out. Their showcase would not have convinced anyone to buy it.
I would call it a fail.
A fail indeed. And that's what the Sega VR headset did. It failed to even launch.
Even though Sega decided not to launch their headset, there were other companies that had made various headsets that mainly integrated with PC, including the Stunmaster, the eyeglasses, and there was the probably most well-known Forte VFX1 virtual reality headset that retailed for around, what was it?
It retailed for around $700 at its launch. So this was definitely the first time people were able to get an affordable VR headset. Some of the older headsets in the 90s were into the thousands of dollars.
What's most notable about this headset is that it came with an interesting piece of hardware called the Cyberpuck. The Cyberpuck was very unique to the Forte VFX1 headset. It allowed you to move forward, backward, while you were using the headset to look around.
It had a few buttons on it that emulated triggers, so you were able to use this in first-person shooter games. There wasn't any sort of control sticks on it. You moved your character in the game by tilting it and turning it in your hand.
The most popular virtual reality system to have come out in the mid-90s was Nintendo's Virtual Boy.
You say popular, I say notorious.
Most popular, unpopular, infamous, notorious, Nintendo's Virtual Boy.
Luckily, I never owned one of these things, and I'm so glad my parents didn't buy into it.
The Virtual Boy was a very real failure.
This was Nintendo's attempt at entering the virtual reality market. The Virtual Boy only lasted a year. There was a handful of games that came out for it, not much third-party support. And by that following year, Nintendo had already pulled the plug on it. So let's talk about a huge failure on Nintendo's part.
1 year.
1 year.
The lifespan of this system
It's a joke.
Unfortunately, the Virtual Boy did not succeed in delivering virtual reality at all. If you haven't played the Virtual Boy yourself, there are many videos on YouTube covering it. If you are still interested in Nintendo's idea of virtual reality, there is an emulator made by Reddit user King of Spain for your Android Gear VR
or your Google Cardboard experience.
In this emulator, they have taken the red and black color scheme and changed it to a black and grayscale color scheme, so hopefully your eyes won't bleed when you play this.
Even though virtual reality took a back seat for many years after that, we still saw technology that derived from virtual reality, one of the main things being motion controls. So some of the most popular examples of motion controls that we saw in video games were the Xbox 360 Kinect, the PlayStation Move and iToy, and of course, the Nintendo Wii, the motion controls that kind of started the whole craze.
Throughout the 2000s, companies tried to push more motion control aspects or camera tracking movements to get us integrated into the idea of operating within a virtual space.
So what Nintendo wanted was more immersion into the games and motions that the characters were making. But what ended up happening is that a lot of companies, capitalizing on the Wii's success, tried to come out with more mini games rather than full-fledged games. And they used a lot of the same motion techniques. instead of innovating anything new. So, unfortunately, the motion experience became cheapened for a lot of people. These companies were trying to make money off of the novelty factor of using your body as a controller.
without ever making it feel meaningful.
Right.
Once we broke into the year 2012, that's when we saw the first development kit and Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift.
So this is the first time we're seeing a reemergence of virtual reality and interest in it since the mid-90s, really.
Moving forward to 2014, the second development kit for the Oculus Rift was made with massive improvements, and then it was sold to Facebook. Once it was sold to Facebook, we saw the release of the Crescent Bay prototype and a partnering with Samsung to make the Gear VR headset.
Yeah, once Facebook and Samsung entered the picture, I think it was clear to consumers that major companies were ready to take another huge step back into virtual reality. And people became excited again because just think about it. How far has computing gone since the mid-90s to now? How much better does CGI graphics look from then till now? I think people became excited thinking that they could actually enter a virtual world and have it look somewhat realistic.
On top of that, we had developers like Valve partnering with HTC to bring us the Vive virtual reality headset.
With the HTC Vive's partnership with Steam, it was clear that gamers were going to see a lot of new content released.
The market was further increased by PlayStation deciding to throw their hat in immediately.
So PlayStation VR was the first console-based virtual reality unit. This is notable because both the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive requires you to buy into their headsets, their peripherals, and have a very high-powered gaming computer. And that is a very big barrier of entry for a lot of folks. But Sony has to be commended for this, for introducing a VR headset for a console that's already in millions of homes in the world.
At this point, we have three major headsets competing for your money. They are the HTC Valve partnership called the Vive headset. We have the Oculus Rift and the Sony PlayStation VR.
So let's look at the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive first. We're going to put them in their own category because they are PC-based.
Microsoft, however, has not yet decided to partner with a currently existing VR headset producer or to make their own. So we're still up in the air as to where they are going to stand with their VR experiences.
So what's the main difference between Oculus Rift and HTC Vive?
Out of the three major consumer-ready virtual reality headsets, the HTC Vive seems to be the only headset that is the most actual virtual reality immersive headset due to its room-scale immersive experience. Whereas the Oculus Rift and the PlayStation VR seem to be more of a sit-down virtual reality experience.
With the HTC Vive, in addition to the headset and the controllers, you also have sensors that you set up in your room. This is what we mean by room scale. So your position in your room relates to the position you are in the game.
There are certain games where you could even crawl on the floor and simulates or emulates your real-time movement in such a way that I think it seems to be the most immersive experience.
For someone like me, that's not really possible. I live in a shoebox of a bedroom, and I do not meet the minimum size requirements for the HTC Vive room tracking. So something like the HTC Vive really wouldn't be for me. I would have to opt for the Oculus Rift because my gaming PC just barely meets the minimum requirements, and it's more of a sit-down experience.
When it comes to the Oculus Rift and the PlayStation VR, they are more static sit-down experiences. I can see the HTC Vive taking off more so in Western and European countries and environments, more so than in Asia, where the population is more dense and they have to live in smaller confined spaces, where I think that more of the sit-down VR experiences are going to take off.
And last, we have the PlayStation VR, which is, like the Oculus Rift, a sit-down experience. But once again, it's for consoles. So if you already have a PlayStation 4, you're ready. All you need is the headset, an iToy, and 2 Move controllers.
In certain games, you could play with the standard controller that comes with the PlayStation 4, but there are certain games that require you to have the Move controllers.
Sony's approach is a little bit interesting to VR. They've developed this brand new helmet. You need the iToy, and you need the Move controllers for a lot of games. So I think it's interesting that Sony is not relying on all brand new technology, but rather this weird mix of a new headset with last generation motion tracking.
It looks like it's $3.99 for just the headset, and then it's $4.99 if you want the headset included with the camera and the Move controllers. And when you're playing PlayStation VR, the other people in the room also get to see what you're doing on the main monitor or television, whatever you're outputting to.
So that makes it kind of a communal experience for everybody. They all feel like they could kind of take part. Even if you're the one controlling it, they could at least see what you're seeing.
I like that idea. I honestly do. So far, Meowte Ching has been able to play the PlayStation VR. What was your experience like?
Some of our friends from work got the PlayStation VR the day it came out and invited me over to play it. And this is on my lunch break, so I was only able to play it for about 10 minutes or so. Now, what surprised me was I sat down in their chair, and they gave me the headset, and I put it on, and it was extremely comfortable right off the bat. And I thought it was going to take my eyes some time to get used to. I thought I was going to be in a period of adjustment, but I wasn't. It felt great, and I felt like I was ready to go. It felt like my brain got it from the start. Maybe some people don't feel that way when they put it on, but I felt like that.
What was the game you played?
So the game I played was Scavenger Odyssey. So that's like a first-person game where you are the pilot of a mech.
You're like an alien piloting a mech.
Yeah, because when you're in the VR headset, you could look down at yourself and you could see that you have like alien arms. You're not a human. And there was also a 360-degree range of motion, so I could turn around and I was able to see the chair I was sitting in. You know, I was able to see all the buttons and stuff in the cockpit, out the windows, but up and above and to the sides. It was pretty cool.
That's very immersive.
Yeah, it wasn't just like looking straight ahead. You had an entire environment you could look at. The game was pretty cool. You aim by looking at whatever you want to shoot at, and the laser would kind of track to where your eyes are going, with a little bit of homing involved. And you were walking around in these really cramped, crowded corridors. These swarms of like these weird squishy insects would come at you, and you would have to shoot them. And you're also able to jump on the walls and on the ceilings, so whenever you would jump, your entire field of vision would turn with you, and that would be the new plane you were on. Definitely showing off a lot of the weird visual tricks you could do with VR.
Were you playing with the controller or with the PlayStation Move controls?
I was just using the regular DualShock controller, and it felt pretty immersive, at least immersive enough for me. So for the 10 minutes or so I played, it was a pretty fun and comfortable experience. My personal thought is this. When I tried on the PSVR headset and played the game for about 10 minutes, I thought it was cool. I didn't think it was extraordinary. I didn't take the headset off and run to the nearest store and buy one. Instead, I said, hey, that's neat. I would like to try a full-fledged game and maybe invest in it years down the line when the technology is better and the price has dropped. But until we really start seeing grand experiences laid out in front of us, VR is still kind of a novel concept. I would like for this to develop as a serious technology rather than be seen as something novel and get kind of thrown to the side in the same way the Wii was.
And when it comes to the Bit War veterans, Miao Ching and Max Inventory have yet to see the first game that really screams, yes, please invest in this technology because you cannot get this experience otherwise.
As of right now, there's too many barriers of entry for me. It's the price, it's the amount of peripherals that you need, it's the high amount of mini games and experiences at a high price, and a lack of fully developed games. For now, virtual reality for me is a pass. What are your thoughts, Max Inventory?
I have to say, at this current state of technology, if I had the money to invest in one, I would go for the HTC Vive. Because the full room experience and being able to move in real space represented in virtual space is the closest thing to virtual reality I could accept as a different experience from playing on consoles or playing how we conventionally play. However, I still think it's just too costly and the software isn't there to support it. Here at the Bit War Veterans, we've been burned by virtual reality of the past, so we are going to take a wait-and-see approach when it comes to this current virtual tech.
Because things are only going to get better and less expensive as time goes on.
Today's Twitter topic of the week was anti-nostalgia. Things from our childhood we necessarily didn't like.
So my anti-nostalgia moment was Tiger handheld electronic games. Oh, you remember those? Ah yes, Tiger handheld electronics. They were very, very simple games with little beeps and boops and black and white graphics. They usually came with cool artwork on the stickers and on the packaging, but they really didn't deliver in terms of fun gameplay.
We hated those.
I had one when I was a kid, and it was a Sonic the Hedgehog. It always made me sad because I never had a Sega system growing up. I never could really play Sonic, and I knew he was cool. One of my cousins had a Genesis, and all I had was the Tiger handheld game. So yeah, Tiger handheld electronics weren't really that great. And that's my example of anti-nostalgia. So our Twitter followers tell the tales of some of their anti-nostalgia memories. First we have Castle Zotz, Z-O-T-Z. He says, the Action Max, VHS-based system he got on cheap on clearance back in the day. Now, I had to look up what the Action Max was because I wasn't familiar with this at all.
You can find a very good video breakdown by the Angry Video Game Nerd of the Action Max video system, where you played along watching a pre-recorded VHS tape with a shoot-'em-up light gun type system, similar to the Nintendo Zapper.
Right, but the games just weren't as fun, and the system itself never really took off, so I'm so sorry you had to play the Action Max, Mr. Castlezotz. We're sorry. So Antsy007 kind of remembers that video game prices were pretty awful back in the day.
Video game prices, I think they were similar to now, whereas pretty much a new cartridge cost you about $60.
I remember some N64 games even moving into the $70, close to $80 range. And even in the past, video games were about $50 to $60 a cartridge, but remember, that was back then when people made less money and wages were much smaller. Therefore, video games seemed even more expensive. RetroCar RCVGM says, handhelds not being backlit properly, or handhelds being poorly done, like the Game Gear or the Lynx.
Yes, I remember very many frustrations in borrowing a friend's Game Boy and struggling to angle this Game Boy to get it in the right light just so I could play it.
I remember playing my Game Boy in the back seat of the car at night, and this was before I had any sort of lights or anything, and I remember just trying to play the game for a few seconds every time we would go underneath a street light, and then then I couldn't play.
I know what you're talking about.
And then you'd have to play for a few more seconds, And then you couldn't play.
You would be in the back of the car with your Game Boy, just kind of waiting for those right moments where you'd be passing under street lights to get the right amount of lighting to be able to see what you're doing.
Fist of the Wind remembers the Power Glove. He says, I have no idea why people romanticize this thing. It was garbage.
The movie The Wizard tried so hard to make the Power Glove seem so cool and so modern and so relevant, and yet it was none of those things.
I think people are drawn to the cheese factor of it nowadays.
Moving on, our next tweet
is from Riding Spectre. The fact that we had to buy TV guides in order to know what was going to be on the television a certain day.
Do you remember TV Guide?
Oh, I remember TV Guide. I mean, everyone had like 50 of these laying around their houses back in the day.
TV Guide was even the subject of a Seinfeld episode. That's how popular TV Guides were.
The next Twitter response comes from Occult Tech. Tiger's god-awful Gamecom handheld from around 97. What a travesty. So the Gamecom, or Game.com as their logo looked like, was a handheld sort of system. It was kind of like a hybrid gaming system and kind of like PDA device. Remember those things that were kind of hot in the later 90s, those PDA devices? Yeah.
What did PDA mean? Palm device application or something like that?
Personal device of assortments. I don't know. But yeah, so you were able to play some games on this, which spoiler alert, they were not very good. And you also had the ability to buy a peripheral that lets you connect to the internet and check your email and look at text-based websites. Oh yeah, extremely primitive. But at its time, I guess it was kind of ahead of its time, considering it was a handheld that could go on the internet to some degree.
Despite having these unique ideas, the Gamescom tried to step forward into the future. However, they were still operating on old Tiger garbage graphics.
Next, we have Robot Ninjutsu, and their anti-nostalgia topic was those wireless controllers in the 8-bit and 16-bit era. If you were going to play with a wireless controller, it was third-party and probably trash.
It wasn't until, I think, the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, and the Nintendo Wii that wireless controls finally got into a place that was acceptable.
And now wireless controllers are pretty much the norm, so we've come a long way.
Twitter user Fernley Flynn remembers the horrors of dial-up internet. No.
Now you're on the internet.
Is there much more to say than that, than dial-up internet? It had so many problems in and of itself.
Well, it was slow, and you had to use up your phone line. I mean, how many times did I have to hear, get off the internet, I want to use the phone?
AOL, Netscape, Earthlink. We remember dial-up internet. It was horrible. It took forever for anything to happen. Mm-hmm. What's next on the Twitter responses?
So the Hibiki TMD had an LJN video art console, and he hated it. So this thing was the actual, like, console unit that plugged into your TV, and it had this joystick that you could use to draw, but the drawing and art application software just really wasn't fun, it wasn't good, it was not intuitive. Mario Paint did it better. And if you had one of these as a kid, I feel sorry for you. You were probably better off with paper and pencil, really.
What's next on our Twitter responses?
Dragoon347 says that he had a Konami Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle handheld game, and it was like similar to the Tiger games where it was just black and white little LCD screens, and it wasn't fun either.
I'm pretty sure I had the same Tiger handheld as Dragoon. We used to play this Tiger handheld of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that was just like the Nintendo video game, where you had to just kind of bash a few enemies. Then you got to a sequence where it was just like the Ninja Turtle game, where you had to swim underwater and disable bombs. We hated it just as much as the Nintendo version, but we continued to crank our 4 AA batteries, or whatever it took to run this thing, and tried to beat it over and over again.
Last, we have Game On Magazine, who hated the fact that, once again, they got a Tiger game for Christmas. And I just want to say that Game On Magazine shared a really funny picture of himself getting this Tiger handheld when they were a kid, and their face says it all.
Which game was it?
It was possibly a Toy Story Tiger handheld electronic.
I remember Tiger even had the audacity to try and put their crappy games on little, watch games.
Yeah, so if you didn't like the crappy Tiger handheld LCDs before, hang on tight, because they just made it smaller. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your experiences and helping us tell the tales. Because here at Bit War Veterans, we're about preserving your experiences and our experiences and sharing them with the gaming community.
The more you check out Bit War Vets on Twitter, the more you have an opportunity to be involved in the show.
So thank you for listening to another episode of the Bit War Veterans.
Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the Bit War Veterans. It has been a blast having your Twitter responses, interacting with us, seeing over 250 downloads in our first episode.
Woo! Yeah, we did not expect to see so much positive response, but thank you all who've downloaded and listened, and thank you for the people who decided to stick around and listen to episode number 2.
When it comes to the future of Bit War Veterans, we would like to have more interviews with people from the industry so we can really preserve the experiences of the past when it comes to video game making and video game playing. And if you've made it this far, you are a veteran of this podcast, and we'd like to see you return for our next episode.
So join us for episode 3, coming out in 2 more weeks.
And we'll see you next time on The Bit War Veterans.